Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from DailyRacingForm, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hi, everyone. Glad you're joining us for Derby Watch. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona, and we are 12 weeks out from the Kentucky Derby. And since we spoke a week ago, we've had one significant change in odds on the Derby Watch and two substitutions, if you want to call it that. Let's take a look at the Derby Watch chart. And David, why don't you go ahead and talk about the major changes since a week ago?
Yeah, among the horses that stayed on the list from last week, the only odds change was Tapit Trice. He went from a 50-1 shot last week after his allowance win last Saturday. I now pegged him at 20-1. I think a lot of people got on the Tapit Trice bandwagon after that victory that we'll talk more about in just a bit. But we did have two points prep races run on Saturday, the Robert B. Lewis and the Holy Bull, and the winners of both of those races were added to the list. Obviously, the Bob Baffert trainee Newgate didn't receive the 20 points that would have been available to him for his Lewis victory, and Rocket Can, I think some questions about the quality of that Holy Bull, so I pegged them at 20-1 and 50-1 respectively.
Well, I'm on that Tapit Trice bandwagon as well. I thought his win was outstanding, and we will talk about that. Before we start reviewing four of the races that we're going to talk about, the two graded stakes and two allowance races, one at Gulfstream, one at Oaklawn, a couple of quick notes. Cave Rock, who is still third choice on Derby Watch, and why not? He finished second in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He was the top 2-year-old in California last year. He still does not have a workout, and I did speak with Bob Baffert about his postponed serious training for 2023. Baffert lost 2 weeks of training with Cave Rock when it was wet out here in California. He said last weekend that Cave Rock will resume working within the next 2 weeks. And he previously told me that Cave Rock is the type of colt with 4 starts under his belt that will not take long to get ready. Now, anytime you talk about Bob Baffert, and there are 7 Baffert trainees on the list, we still have the entire unresolved Churchill Downs ban of Baffert trainees that we're waiting to see what happens. So it's kind of hanging over everyone's head what's going to happen with the Baffert trainees, whether he skips the Derby altogether or whether some of these good 3-year-olds transfer into other stables, I suppose. Well, we have a lot to talk about with regards to what happened on the racetrack last week, and we're going to start off talking about Bob Baffert. He had 4 starters in the Robert B. Lewis last weekend at Santa Anita. It was a grade 3. And David, why don't you go ahead and take us through the stretch run of the Bob Lewis, 4 starters, all trained by Baffert.
Yeah, this race did not feature that much pace up front, so I guess it's a positive that Newgate was able to close from towards the back of this compact 4-horse field to get up for the victory, and it's also a positive sign that Newgate was actually able to pass horses in the stretch of this race, because he had shown some tendencies to hang in his 2 prior starts when beaten by some Bob Baffert-trained stablemates, especially last time in the Sham, so nice to see him get the job done here, but it's hard to know what to make of these races. It got a very strong 100 buyer speed figure that both the winner and Hard to Figure, the runner-up, both got those triple-digit buyers. But when they're just facing their stablemates, it's hard to know where they really slot in the larger Derby picture.
Yeah, this is a very difficult race to analyze. I don't think you can really, get behind anyone with a lot of enthusiasm, and you really can't knock anyone as well. I found it very interesting that both Newgate and Hard to Figure both earned 100 buyer speed figures. I do my own personal speed figures, and I also came up with a very highly rated race, which kind of surprised me because, the top 3 finishers, Newgate, Hard to Figure, and Worcester, they all earned career best numbers. Okay, that's maybe to be expected early in a 3-year-old's campaign. But 4th place finisher Arabian Lion, who completely misfired, he earned a 92 buyer speed figure, which was almost identical to his career best going in. I don't know what to make about this speed figure. Are you having as much trouble, David, as I am, kind of finding a resolution to that dilemma?
It's all a little hard to figure, no pun intended, to justify the speed figures for this race. But I mean, the math is the math. And you said that's how it works out. My colleague Craig Wilkowski, who does the Timeform US speed figures, gave this race a 115. So just slightly lower than Beyer, but still among the fastest Derby preps that we've seen so far. So it's going to be interesting in future starts if these horses are able to validate these numbers.
Yeah, Newgate and Hard to Figure both earned 100 buyer. Newgate onto the list. David, you and I discussed Hard to Figure. We said we're going to hold off and before we jump in, put add another Baffert trainee to the top 20. But Newgate, you're right. At least he showed some guts in the lane for a change as opposed to just running alongside a horse, and he got the job done. Well, down at Gulfstream Park last weekend in the grade 3, it was the Holy Bull, and I'd like to say something really nice about this race, David, but I really can't. So maybe you can put a positive spin on what I thought was a kind of a dreadfully slow race, talking about the Holy Bull at Gulfstream Park.
Well, as we take a look at the stretch run, the positives that I saw were that Rocket Cam, the winner, did overcome a wide trip, so we'll give him credit for that. And also, he finished off this race and was able to put away some challenges in the lane, whereas in his prior start, a second-place finish against Allowance Company at Churchill Downs, he had shown the tendency to hang a little bit on horses, so nice to see him finish off this race. But as you said, his main rival, Cyclone Mischief, failed to show up in this race. The two horses that finished directly behind Rocket Can were not particularly accomplished coming in here, and the buyer speed figure of 82 is just not going to cut it if this horse is going to stay relevant in the Derby conversation.
It was the lowest rated Holy Bull in the 30 plus years of buyer speed figures, an 82 buyer. If it was up to me, I would not have included Rocket Can on our top 20 list. But David, as you accurately pointed out, we have to at least acknowledge that he earned 20 points and he's very close to already qualifying for the Kentucky Derby. If the Derby was run in a couple weeks, I couldn't pick Rocket Can anywhere in the top 5. But what about you? I mean, yeah, he did race wide, and maybe he'll improve. But man, I thought that was just a bad race.
Yeah, this is something we chatted about earlier in the week. Do we add Rocket Can? Do we potentially add yet another Bob Baffert horse to the list and make it 8 out of the 20 trained by Bob Baffert? It just seems a little hard to go in that direction when all of those horses have 0 points. And you take a look at Rocket Can, and his 20 points put him 3rd currently on the qualifying list of horses that have received points towards the Kentucky Derby. So I think we have to respect that at this stage in early February, but things are likely to change in the coming weeks.
Well, I think you accurately priced Rocket Can at 50 to 1. In addition to Rocket Can joining the list, Cyclone Mischief completely misfired. He did not have a real comfortable trip in traffic, but he completely spit it out and ran horribly. And I don't know whether it was running without Lasix, because his best non-Lasix performance is kind of slow. The only time he ran a fast race was the only time he was treated with Lasix. So he's off the list, and it's kind of interesting to me, a couple reasons. First of all, the horse that he destroyed in the allowance race, Litigate, I believe he's running Saturday at Tampa Bay Downs in the Sam Davis. And secondly, we're going to have another similar situation with regards to a colt by the name of Hit Show, who ran well with Lasix last time out. He's going up to Aqueduct for the Withers, and he'll be running without Lasix. So I think that's kind of an underlying storyline that we're going to have to monitor as we move forward. Horses adding Lasix, running huge, and then coming off Lasix, and seeing if they can reproduce that performance. Would you agree or not?
Yeah, generally as a handicapper, I try not to make too much of Lasix. Sometimes I think the issue gets a little bit overblown, but when you see the evidence of a horse like Cyclone Mischief run that breakout performance with Lasix and then regress to even worse than before when he comes off it, you do have to wonder a little bit. And watching his race, he did travel very keenly early on, and then once Tyler Gaffalione asked him for run around the far turn, he came up completely empty. So I think that legitimizes some of those concerns. So definitely something to keep in mind for these future Derby preps.
Well, Newgate and the Lewis and the Rocket Can in the Holy Bull, let's turn our attention to a couple of allowance races that were pretty impressive. And David, you mentioned at the top that Tapit Trice was very impressive. I really like this colt, and I think the best is yet to come for Tapit Trice as we take a look at the allowance race run at Gulfstream Park last weekend. Tell us about this race.
Yeah, I've been on the Tapit Trice bandwagon for a little while now, and I think it got a little more crowded over the weekend with this performance. The reality is he probably wasn't beating that much in this race. The only serious rival for him was his Todd Pletcher-trained stablemate, Shesterkin, but you can see what he's doing to that horse in the stretch here. He is just pulling away with those long strides through the lane. He's got a pedigree that suggests that added ground is supposed to be no problem at all, and he certainly finishes off his races that way. The one concern I do have about Tapit Trice is that he did it once again again, as he has in all 3 of his starts. He broke slowly from the starting gate, and that's going to become more of a concern as these fields get larger and he has to qualify for the Kentucky Derby and some more competitive stakes races.
Well, real good point. His odds dropped from 50-1 down to 20-1. You're right. The bandwagon is getting crowded, and I'm a proud member of that bandwagon. Good win by Tapit Trice. I guess now he'll have to go into a graded stakes race, try to pick up some Derby points, but I think that the best is yet to come for Tapit Trice, and I actually feel the same way about a colt who won an allowance race down at Oaklawn Park. We talked about putting Gun Pilot on the top 20 list, but he didn't quite make the cut. His win down at Oaklawn, I thought, was very impressive. His 3rd career start, he was the 3-5 favorite. Yeah, he was supposed to win, but I like the way that Gun Pilot finished off his allowance race down at Oaklawn Park. Let's take a look at the stretch run.
Yeah, I think this is very similar to the notes that we made about Tapit Trice. Not really sure what else was in this field aside from Gun Pilot from a quality standpoint, but you had to like the way he was finishing off this race at the end, especially right here in the final furlong where he puts away that rival to the inside and really extends his stride through the wire of that short stretch at Oaklawn Park. Gun Pilot, trained by Steve Asmussen. Obviously, he doesn't have that Kentucky Derby win yet, but he certainly knows how to get a horse to the Kentucky Derby. So Gun Pilot should have some opportunities to pick up some points pretty soon.
Asmussen is long overdue for his first Kentucky Derby win, and Mary Rampolini reported on Wednesday that Gun Pilot is likely to make his graded stakes debut February 25th in the Rebel Stakes at Oaklawn Park, and we'll find out how good he is when he has to run up against some very good horses. Okay, Tapit Trice, his odds go from 50 to 20. Newgate and Rocket Can, 2 additions to the Derby Watch Top 20. We say goodbye to Arabian Light and Cyclone Mischief, and that's a wrap for the recap segment of Derby Watch. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. We're going to turn our attention to looking forward in the next segment. I'll see you then.